Welcome back to FranklinCovey's On Leadership series. I'm Scott Miller, and I serve as your host and interviewer each week. I am delighted to announce that today is the 1-year anniversary of FranklinCovey's On Leadership newsletter and podcast. We have a great guest for you today. If you're not subscribing to On Leadership, visit FranklinCovey.com, click on the On Leadership tab, and the email newsletter comes to you every Tuesday complimentary, where we feature a different thought leader, best-selling author, someone of significant influence that comes to your inbox in an interview just like this. It includes a tool from FranklinCovey's broad tool set, as well as a blog article written by me. You can also consume it in podcast format. We push it out to every major podcast platform: Apple, FranklinCovey, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Download it, rank it, review it, rate it, and give us feedback on future guests. Now, when we thought about who would be the best guest for our 1-year anniversary, we set to work looking at all of the New York Times best-selling authors, went through Amazon, talked to our publicists, our agents, our publishers. We had a huge list of major thought leaders, celebrities, sports players, people that we thought you would love to hear from to launch the 1-year celebration. And although many of those are in the queue for the coming 12 months of interviews, we all agreed on one person. We thought, who would be the most thoughtful, endearing, and sincere interview to talk about FranklinCovey and leadership? And we settled, believe it or not, on our very own CEO and chairman, Bob Whitman. So Bob, welcome to On Leadership.
Thanks, Scott.
Honestly, it was an honor.
To be here.
That's how it went. We had all these amazing names of influential people who we will book and who will accept it in the next year. But we thought we wanted to kind of cap the year with you coming down and following 51 interviews and have you share with us your own leadership journey, your struggles, your triumphs, your vision, not your visions, but your vision for the firm, and really have you kind of share, not just with all of our associates worldwide, but all of our subscribers, our clients, our facilitators, and kind of have them get to know you a bit better and sort of how you see the business landscape, what you see as the role of leaders in organizations. So,
well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
We're honored to have you, sir.
Delighted to be here.
So you and I have spent a lot of time together over the last 20 plus years. I was talking to you off air. You and I have been on lots of planes together. Shanghai, Beijing, Munich, London, Amsterdam, all around the US. We've spent thousands of hours together. I know you quite well. I kind of see you as my co-father and big brother and boss, by the way. So I'd like to have you share with our audience a bit about your leadership journey. Take a few minutes and have people kind of orient to how you became the CEO of FranklinCovey. It's a good story.
Well, I mean, I got an early leadership experience that was a tough one, actually. When I was 27 years old, on my 27th birthday, I was called to Chicago. Mel Simon, who is the founder of Simon Property Group, was the chairman of a company that was a resort development company that I worked for. And he told me they had just reorganized management.
That's never a good sign.
That I was the new CEO.
Okay, that's a good thing.
And that they were putting the company into bankruptcy to work through all the debt. And it was a great experience. It was a tough experience, but you learned a lot early about really what it takes to work through a difficult situation, and it was difficult.
You were the CEO of a real estate company at the age of 27.
Yeah, but it was in bankruptcy. So it wasn't that great. Following that, when that got all worked through, I went to the Trammell Crow Company in Dallas, which was then the country's largest real estate developer in a bunch of different categories.
So you moved from Utah out to Dallas with your family.
Moved to Dallas.
Right.
And Harlan Crow and I co-ran a group. He was nice enough to let me co-run it with him. A group called Trammell Crow Interest that included Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. It was in its startup phase, and medical business and agribusiness and public distribution and trucking, international development. We had a mishmash of businesses. But it was a great time. Harlan and I spent a lot of time together, Ann Raymond, and worked through some of the challenges of these businesses. It was a difficult time in the economy. It was right when the Southwest economy collapsed and all the banking system.
This is the S&L crisis in the late 80s.
The S&L crisis in the late 80s.
Right.
And after about a year and a half in that role, I was asked to take a sabbatical and become chief financial officer for the firm overall, which had 3,400 partnerships around the U.S. Many of which were in difficult situation because of the general economy and the difficult banking environment.
That was both an honor and a massive burden.
Yeah, it was
challenge,
a big burden. Yeah, and so I was at the office very early every morning, like 3 or 3:30, and working through this, and also ran the capital markets group there. When we finally worked through all those challenges, there was a huge group, at Trammell Crow who worked through these challenges and eventually got them all resolved. A guy that I'd gone to business school with and I formed a company called Hampstead Group that was a real estate-oriented private equity firm, and our idea was to back great entrepreneurs who had a great idea or with a great business, needed capital and maybe some advice. And during the next 10 years, we built up, a series of companies that were, really got to back some great people and be their partners and help them, grow some pretty good-sized companies during those years.
And along the way, you happened upon Dr. Stephen R. Covey.
Yeah.
Talk about that story.
Yeah, so during those times, actually at the Trammell Crow Company, Joel Peterson, who was the head of the Trammell Crow Company, and I were saying, what do you do if you're the country's largest developer and nothing needs to be developed for the next 7 years? And so we wanted to take our real estate expertise and move it into the services area. And so we said, well, why don't we call Stephen Covey and see if he would come and speak to the partners meeting, which was at the Stanford Court Hotel in San Francisco, about a paradigm shift. Because no one really wanted to be anything other than a developer, but nothing needed to be developed. And
at that point, Stephen was just starting to earn some influence because the book, The 7 Habits,
the book had been out
published.
just a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, a couple of years. And so we met Stephen. Stephen was nice enough to ask Joel and I both to go on his board. And so we went on the Covey Leadership Center board in 1992, I think. And then they merged with Franklin Quest in 97.
Right.
We both ended up on the FranklinCovey board.
Right.
And then 20 years ago, I was asked to serve as chairman, not with the idea of running the company, but the company was facing some challenges there in the planner business and some of the things. Right. And we did a search, couldn't find a real CEO, and eventually I was asked to serve as CEO. So now I've been doing this for 20 years, but that's how I got here.
Serendipitous that you actually brought Stephen in to teach your firm about paradigm shifts, and then you ended up with the honor of becoming our chairman and CEO, right?
No, it's been
20 plus years later. Because you're so humble, I know you so well, you skipped over some of the patches there. You've done some things other than real estate, obviously, and FranklinCovey. Talk about some of the other side ventures, successful or otherwise, that you've also been involved in.
Yeah, well, we were in the lodging business directly and had the chance to back some great people who built up Wyndham Hotels and Resorts and Felcor, Bristol Hotels and Resorts, a big retirement housing company called Forum Group that was sold to Marriott. And those were kind of our core capabilities. We also did a couple of things that turned out not to be our core capabilities. We bought a restaurant chain called Houlihan's. Yeah. And got a great guy.
It was one in my hometown in Florida.
Yeah, got a great guy to run it, and he had a great vision of what to do. But we learned it is a very, very tough business, even when you have a good brand and great management. It can be so nuanced that we didn't do well.
And you owned, it was 150 plus?
140 or so
140 restaurants, yeah.
Yeah, and so we now go to restaurants. But
You
we
don't buy them or own them or run them.
And that was a difficult one. We also bought a company that owned the Malibu Grand Prix racing parks.
Sure.
With the idea of transforming them into this new concept called speed zones, which we did in Los Angeles, Dallas, and Atlanta. They did generate a lot of revenue and profitability, but not relative to their cost. And so we learned again that some of these businesses are just fundamentally difficult businesses, even if you've got the right idea. But those are some kind of side journeys along the way.
Hard lessons.
Yeah, well learned.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk, thank you for that. Let's talk about some of your own leadership lessons. Now, I'm gonna pitch you a half dozen competencies that I think you actually model. And I'm gonna ask you just to accept the compliment and just explain why you implement that. So just take them as they come. First, I think you are exceptionally great at carrying your own weather. It's a concept that Dr. Covey popularized in his book about resisting the reactivity of other people's moods and issues. So just assume for a moment I'm right. And to the degree you agree that you carry your weather well, talk to the audience around why that's so important to you, why you see that as a leadership trait, and some advice you might give people like me who tend to be fairly easily poked and reactive to situations, and some things that I could do to be better at that.
I learned early in this first company that was in bankruptcy. I mean, there were a lot of very difficult things to deal with, and you recognize that you really didn't control what was coming every day. Every day was very difficult, and it was difficult for years actually working through all the problems of that company. But you recognize that the mood of the whole company depended a little bit on how I reacted to the challenges we had.
Right.
And how and so it was, but you also just couldn't put on an act. And so you really had to learn to say, wait a second, we need to confront reality, but we don't have to be miserable about it. You know, I mean, we can confront and say there are a series of problems without being emotional about it. And I learned a lot during those years of saying, you know, of just waking up in the morning and saying, wait a second, this is a set of challenges, but it's not, you know, life and death, as important as it is. And I think that helped me in those years, honestly, to just say, you know, I actually do get to choose how I respond. And I can either be miserable all day. What I did instead was try to say, what are the two things I fear most today? The two banks that I have to talk to that I thought, well, shoot, if they don't come along, it could be problematic. And I just thought, I'm going to call them first thing in the morning. And if it's as bad as I think, at least it'll be over for the day. And if it's not, I'm going to have a great day. And so I think, you know, just through the years, you've recognized that if you know, that really your job is to address problems and address opportunities. Not everything's going to be happy, but you can choose, you know, kind of your response in the circumstance.
So I'm a member of your executive team, and I've learned a lot of lessons from you. One of them that you've taught your entire team and the company at large is this idea of separating implementing an idea from making the right decision. Yeah. Talk about how that discipline is so valuable for leaders to separate those so they do make the right decisions and don't become maybe clouded or overwhelmed from, well, that would be so hard to implement.
I think it is one of the most difficult leadership challenges, because when you're faced with a challenge or faced with a problem, you know, immediately you start thinking of all the difficulty in implementing a problem. Oh gosh, this would affect these people. It would, right. You know, you have to get this. And you get clouded. You know, I found myself in my early days and saw other people in the same circumstance get very clouded by the difficulty of implementing what was actually the right decision. And so I really made a decision at one point, you know, what if you could separate making the right decision from the difficulty of implementing it and just saying they're completely different things. And so I'd pose the question to myself as I'd go run in the morning or something, okay, what would I do if I flew in from out of the solar system and I didn't have any emotional connection to anything and I just was looking at the circumstance, what would the right decision be? And by the time I got back from it, I knew what the right decision was. Now you had all the issues of implementing it, but you know, to not get those two confused, I think, is an important thing, because so many people get frozen into inaction or taking inadequate action because they're so worried about the consequence. When if they really recognize, hey, this is the right thing to do, now let's deal with implementation of it. You know, and separating those two things has helped me a lot over the years in facing difficult decisions. I
also think, Bob, from our previous question around you know, measuring your temperament and always being in control of your emotions, that one of the things you're great at, and I've complimented you on this in front of others, is that you're pretty good at compartmentalizing. And when I say that, I've watched you move from a meeting that was perhaps very, could be very emotional for someone else, right? Really bad news, challenging news could weigh on you, to immediately have to have another couple-hour meeting on a strategy session, back to perhaps another really emotional situation. And I have watched you. It doesn't mean that you're cold or that you're robotic, but you're pretty disciplined at compartmentalizing that hour from this hour, and you don't tend to bring the emotions or the elation or the excitement from one to another. How did you develop that competency, that discipline? Because I think that's important for all leaders, to be able to be calm and gathered and measured, and not let your anger on one thing spill over into your reputation on another.
You get to choose. That is a big thing, because, you know, and so you recognize, well, wait a second, the next person who spent 4 hours preparing for the 1 hour meeting with you, you know, for them, that's a really important hour, and it's probably important for you and the future of the company too. And if you're bogged down in the problem you just heard about in the previous meeting, you both don't do justice to the person who's prepared, and you also get jaundiced a little bit in terms of how you're responding to their idea. And so to me, I've learned over the years, just, you know, it's not always, you know, certainly far from perfect in doing it, but it really, you know, each thing is its own circumstance. They may be connected, but, you know, that really you get to choose the response. And, you know, that problem is probably not going to be fatal. And if it's not fatal, then might as well focus on the new opportunity and just try to separate the two. And so don't do it as well as I should. But
I think you're great at it. Think about your role as CEO for a moment. If Princeton or Stanford or Emory or Auburn called you up and said, we want you to hold a session on how to be a great CEO, recognizing that every situation might be different. What advice would you give a CEO out there, regardless of the size company, on how they should spend their time? Because I'm sure you're dealing with shareholders, big and small. You're dealing with, running a public company, strategy, culture, operations, acquisition, talent development. How do you decide to use your time? Because at the end of the day, your decisions and your time are your most valuable asset as a CEO. What lessons have you learned as you've become the CEO of small companies and large companies, public and private? How do you choose to spend your time?
I think, for me at least, and again, I don't know if this is good advice for everyone, but for me it's to try to say there are two places you ought to spend your time: on the biggest opportunities and the biggest problems.
Yep.
And if you really say, okay, I'm going to try to address the biggest challenges and have a plan for working those through, really most of the rest of my time is spent with people on the biggest opportunities for going forward. And so I suspect every CEO, ends up doing that. But the time in between, the thin things, as we say, you don't want to spend your time in the thick of thin things. Mm-hmm. If you're focusing on solving big problems or addressing big opportunities, that is kind of what my agenda is most weeks, is when I plan out the week. It's the big rocks, as we teach, kind of come around one of those two things, either solving a problem or addressing a big opportunity. And that maybe is a guide for, at least for me.
So let's get personal for a moment. I was talking about how you plan your week. I happen to know that you have a bit of a philosophy on as a leader in every aspect of your life, that you want to become really optimize every role in your life. And you have a process of where you usually wear a shirt that has has cards in it. The cards are out for the interview, but disclose for the audience, if you will, a little bit the personal side of how you choose to kind of live your life around maximizing your roles. I think it's endearing.
Well, you do have different roles. So for me, every day I've got my list of my roles, and I've kind of make a list of the 5 whats and the 5 whos.
Okay.
And the whats are driven by the big objective, around whatever role I might be playing, and the whos are trying to make sure that the most important whos in my life, who are whichever role they're in, get the time too. And so it's maybe a simplistic way of doing it, but I figure if I can address the 5 biggest important things in a day and try to stay on the first one until I make substantial progress, and don't forget to connect with the 5 whos, that somehow it's kind of balanced, life is balanced out okay.
But there are 5 whos and 5 whats.
They are.
And your roles, I've seen your cards once, you don't call it CEO, but leader of this firm and husband and grandfather, right? Yeah. And you connect to those daily.
I do, pretty much.
I know. I think it's inspiring.
You tell my grandkids at least every 2 days, and 7 grandkids.
Bob, of all the leadership principles, habits, disciplines, practices, challenges that you deal with at FranklinCovey, what do you struggle with the most as a leader? Which of all of the concepts that we teach and we share and challenge with, which one do you struggle with? What's hard for you?
I think the hardest thing in the world is focus. Honestly, I think the hardest thing is to stay focused in a world of choices. And so I think while I view my responsibility as being focused, it's, I think, the single hardest thing to be sufficiently focused on the smallest number of really important, high-impact things and spend a disproportionate amount of time on those. I think
because the temptation to...
Yeah, because there's so many things you can involve in and can influence. Yeah. And you can easily end up at any day, let alone a week or a month, having touched a lot of things that were not that important. So, I think it's a difficult challenge for every organization, every individual. It's a continual challenge. But to me, that's one which, if won, to the extent you can win, and you're spending a way disproportionate amount of your energy, emotion, and talent, to the extent you have it, on the things that have the greatest impact, you end up having a pretty, I think you can have a lot more impact than you think.
Disproportionate. Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about leader as coach. So I think it's one of your passions and talents as well. I've reported to you for about a decade now, worked ultimately for you for over 2 decades. And I know I've come hat in hand several times to your office, several dozen times to your office. One in particular that's visceral to me is, gosh, I don't know, 8 years ago, I was leading a campaign and I had not properly done all the due diligence to make sure that the name for that campaign could be trademarked by us. In fact, I was midway through branding a launch of something and discovered through a letter from an attorney that we, in fact, had not appropriately protected that brand. In fact, we were accidentally, unwittingly using someone else's brand. And we solved it very amicably to their delight as well. But I had to come in and explain to you, I had made a fairly significant challenge in that this person was, perhaps going to litigate against us, and that I immediately told you all the facts, hopefully, and it was not a small, costly decision for the company. And I remember as it was yesterday, it was not a small problem, and you immediately began to share with me a similar mistake you'd made early on in your career, of even bigger impact. And you could have done lots of things. You could have lost your cool, likely not, but you could have shamed me. You could have just dismissed it and not confronted it. And I might have gone out and not thought it was a very big deal, but we sat down, we talked about the gravitas of it. But you shared, and you gave me kind of permission to own my mistake, talk about what had led me to that. It was a very endearing leadership moment where I didn't feel any less responsible, but I wanted to rise to the standard you kind of set for me. Where did you learn that? Skill, patience?
I think from having other people exhibit that patience with me, honestly. You just recognize that in reality, hey, look, life has lots and lots of errors, right? Associated with it. Most golf putts don't drop, most basketball shots don't drop. And if you spend your time on the problems and the mistakes, you can learn from them. But realistically, I've been the beneficiary many times of other people's patience. So maybe it's just easier to recognize that we all make mistakes, and most of them are not fatal. In fact, very few of them turn out to be fatal.
Yeah, right.
And so that kind of keep it in perspective and recognize that in the end, it's a partnership. We're all we bring the good and all the brilliant moments, and we also bring some things that aren't as brilliant, and that no one would want to be judged by their worst moment, right? And it's such an unfair way to assess people, is to take a mistake and make that the main thing in a landscape that's so beautiful of all the great things they're doing. So again, I think primarily I learned from people having that same patience with me at an early age, in my 27-year-old CEO
of a bankrupt company. Soon to be bankrupt. Bob, let's assume for a minute that you become the CEO of another company, and you're trying to recruit staff and build an executive team. What are the types of, you're fairly seasoned, by experience, not by age, but what types of characteristics, competencies do you look for in a leader at any level? Kind of think through, name me 5 or 6 leadership competencies that you really value, whether it's a first-level leader, mid-level leader, or an executive-level leader.
Well, for me, one is character. Okay. So for me, and again, I don't mean that anybody would want to have somebody that had bad character, but I think character is multifaceted. That really it's a deep well of personal resolve, it's personal integrity and so forth. I think most leadership journeys are a marathon, not a sprint. And it is very difficult if the person who's the leader doesn't have fundamentally good character.
Right.
I think second is intellectual curiosity. The world is changing so rapidly. You're not hiring somebody for what they know, it's what they could know, right? And what they want to know, and the capabilities they have. And so I think intellectual curiosity is observed by, they really want to know the answer to everything, or at anything, and they're willing to go after it. I think that's another, really important quality. And the third is being a partner. Somebody who really actually sees the value in other people and wants to leverage the capabilities of a team rather than just being an individual contributor. So those are 3 things that I look at.
Talk about your own leadership journey. What have you learned over the course of your 40-year career that you thought these leadership traits were important early on, and you've come to learn, actually, it's these leadership traits? Have you made some evolution in your own thinking around your own leadership style?
Yeah,
Share
definitely.
some of those.
I would say that early on, I was an individual contributor at a high level, but I felt like I had to own the whole problem. If I shared the problem, other people would be depressed by it, and particularly my circumstance. These early circumstances of difficult workouts or whatever else. and gave other people too little credit for actually the fact they're actually more worried when you don't tell them. They think it's worse than it really is.
So you've learned to become more transparent?
Yeah, so I think early on I felt like I had to take all the responsibility. I had to own the whole solution. I had to solve the problem rather than saying, hey, wait a second, let's just describe the problem and figure out how to get everybody together addressing it. But first of all, the weight is different, it's distributed, and the solutions come out a lot more rapidly, and at the same time, it builds the team. It builds the feeling of, hey, we're all in this together, and we're going to figure it out together. And I think early on, I was too focused on my individual contribution and felt like that was my responsibility. So I have gone quite a bit the other way, where I feel like almost every decision now is a partnership kind of a decision.
Yeah. I've also heard you talk about, as the leader, you don't have to have all the solutions. You don't have to have all the answers. You're a big fan of Liz Wiseman, as have I, right? Her book Multipliers is up here, around leaders are trying to bring out the genius of others and bring people up that are super smart in their own respective areas. You don't have to be the font of all knowledge.
Right.
So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I was saying, I think you do sometimes feel the responsibility to have the answer. And really, I think if you have the question, that's much more important.
Yeah. Let's talk about FranklinCovey. So you've been here a long time, right? You served on the board. You've been our chairman and CEO for the last 21 years? 21 years, that's right. Yeah. And you've seen a couple evolutions, right? I mean, you inherited it as the Franklin Quest company with, how many retail stores were there?
184.
184? Wow, and a big online business, consumer-focused business, and you and the board and your leadership team transitioned out of that business. There's been several transitions since then. And FranklinCovey has really become, from my estimation, the world's most reputable intellectual property company as it relates to leadership development. There's been several transitions. There's been a really crucial one that came about 4 years ago or so. Again, check your humility, because as the CEO and chairman of the board, you're responsible for setting vision and strategy. Talk about where you and the board have taken the company in terms of transforming the way we work with clients, as most people now know as the All Access Pass. I'd like you to take a few minutes and talk about how that idea came about, why you and the board thought it was wise, how you've implemented it, and then I'd like to talk about how do you see that changing the landscape of how organizations work with us, the marketplace, and how important learning is to organizations. It's a long question there.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to actually the early days when I was here. I mean, really the seed of it was planted then. In the early days, you may recall I was out, most Tuesdays and Wednesdays I was out with our sales force visiting clients.
Hundreds of client meetings.
Hundreds of client visits. And during that period of time, you recognize that there were kind of two sides to the equation of this learning and development or performance improvement. One was just skill development. There was a need for building basic skills in individuals, capabilities, and that a lot of people in the industry are really responsible for that. There was the other side, which was connecting those capabilities to actually getting a business outcome. Right. I was at a company, I was at Johnson & Johnson actually with the chief learning officer, head of the corporate university at Johnson & Johnson. And he said, we've trained 3,500 people in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I said, well, that's really a large number. How many total employees do you all have? And he said 30,000. And I said, well, so let me ask you a question. You were saying how great it is, and it is great that you've trained 3,500, but are the rest of them already so effective they don't need it?
Right.
Or
why stop at 10%?
Why stop at 10%?
Right.
And he said, well, we love you. We love FranklinCovey.
And we being?
And then he said, we, the learning and development people, love you, but the line leaders, it's not that they don't like you. They love your content, but they just don't see how what you do drives what the results they have to do today. They've got sales to do. They've got customer loyalty to drive. They've got other things to do. And after hearing that, so I asked that question in the next 100 sales calls. And what would be the one thing you wish we could do differently? Or what would it take to make it easier for you to have us go to different parts of the organization? We recognized that in the end, if you couldn't connect yourself to the large-scale change in human behavior, it's one thing to build skills in individuals, but to get those individuals collectively working toward a common objective is really the Holy Grail. Based on that, as you know, we went in and we created practices and execution, customer loyalty, sales performance, education, trust, these things that become pervasive behavioral change things. So those 10 years of building all the content put us in a position to then address this 4 years ago, we said, really, if we're going to be the partner of choice for these customers, for these clients, we're now the partner of choice because they can hire us, they can engage us to help them develop capabilities, but also get results that require a lasting change of behavior at scale. But we're making it too difficult for them, because they have to engage with us at one solution at a time.
Right.
So ultimately, in the end, it said, the world they live in, what if we could offer all of our content to those individuals in all modalities, across all languages, at a price per person trained that would be the same as they're paying for a single course in a single modality, have somebody to help them that would navigate and create solutions to the real challenges. We could really be their partner. And so once we recognized that's what it would take to really be the partner of choice, and we went out and did hundreds of interviews, and what would it really take for us to be your partner, we found that many of our clients said, gosh, we would love it if you would make it easier to access this. And once we understood that, it made it easy to, even though it was dramatic change in accounting and investment and so forth, it was actually a pretty easy strategic decision, just like every other decision was during those same 20 years, to try to say, in the end, we want to be the partner of choice with clients who we want to have clients for life.
So I think it's reasonable to say the All Access Pass has transformed our relevancy with clients and future clients, that it's also disrupted the landscape of the industry. It wasn't our intention, but it's changed the way clients are demanding services from all of our competitors as well. I was interviewing Karen Dillon recently, a good friend of yours, who is the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. And she was reminding me in one of these interviews that I think it was north of 95% of companies that have been successful by their measure, financial measure, that the vast majority of them ended up with a different strategy than they began with, right? It was from deliberate strategy to emergent strategy. As you look at are we 4 years into All Access Pass?
Just
4 years in. As you look at kind of what your vision was for it originally, kind of where you see the puck going. What do you see as the emergent strategy a couple years from now? Clients that are renewing, expanding their pass, that are really transforming their organization. Do you have a vision of what that looks like down the road?
We do, and I think it's driven by the same things. What are the major challenges those customers or our clients are facing that require a scaled change in human behavior? And so for us, we have a map, as you know, that goes out several years, and beyond the 8 focus areas we have today, we have another map of the 3 or 4 that'll be coming. And so I think for us, we're saying if we can continue to help our clients address the biggest challenges they have that require lasting change in human behavior at scale, and that we're their partner of choice in solving those big intractable problems, that drives our product development map, because we again want those clients to be clients for life, and we want to have them be more important, and feel that we're more important partners to them 5 years from now than they are now, and the best way is helping them solve the major challenges they have. So.
Well, it goes back to your previous comment around the leadership competency of focus, right? You're not, as our CEO, trying to make the All Access Pass the largest collection of content found anywhere in the world. You're quite deliberate at how you're curating content and how you're offering it in the past, because you're being very specific around what are the key issues our clients are facing, not what are all the issues our clients are facing. I
think it's true. And again, I think there's some tremendous libraries of content that have been created by others. They give wide access to skills and so forth. And it's in some respects, maybe it's getting to the point where it's a little hard to differentiate yourself in that space, because there's so many courses. There are thousands and thousands of courses you can take on anything, but they're all good. And we admire those companies that are doing it. We're just not playing on that side. We're saying, please use, you should probably buy a subscription to one of those so you can, if your people need skills in any individual thing, how to do Outlook or create a resume or whatever, but that'll solve that problem for you. But if you're focused on the things where you need to get lots of people in your organization
Change
to
their behavior.
something different or better or more consistently, we want to be your partner of choice for those things.
Well said. Our time is coming to an end. I'm going to ambush you with this question around Hiram and Stephen. So the founders of our company were Hiram Smith and Stephen R. Covey, 2 very dear friends of yours. Hiram to this day is still a good friend. He's been on our set. Dr. Covey passed, I think, just shy of 7 years ago or so. Tell us something you learned from Hiram and something you learned from Dr. Covey.
Great. From Hiram, actually in 1985, I took the Time Quest course.
85.
1985.
I graduated in 86 from high school.
I took the Time Quest course in Dallas from Hiram Smith.
Wow. He taught it.
He taught it.
Yeah.
I went home that weekend, created my the long-term values, long-term goals for my family. We created a list. I created a list for our family of 46 adventures that I wanted our kids to have had by the time, each of them by the time they had left school. Some were intellectual adventures or cultural adventures or service or athletic achievement thing.
46.
Yeah, I just I made this long list.
You brainstormed a list?
And so every Sunday night for the next 20 years, when I would plan the week, we would plan our family's future around those experiences we wanted them to have. So that's one thing I learned from him.
How far did you get to the 46?
When my son left, we'd had like 30, he'd done like 32.
Wow.
And my daughter had done like 34 or something by the time she left. And I don't think we ever got the rest of them.
Do you still have the list of 46?
Yeah, I do somewhere.
I
did. I've seen it.
You and your wife and your kids curated them together.
Yeah, we can. I
special.
reviewed it with people and thought, hey, so when we're going to this place, let's also do this thing. And
tell me again, sorry. So some of them were, you said intellectual.
So the intellectual, cultural,
spiritual,
service, spiritual, and athletic.
Wow. How did you learn that?
No, I just learned it from Hiram. He said pick categories of things, and so I thought, oh, that's a good idea.
That's a good workshop.
And so it was a great thing. And so I'd say that was a life-changing thing from Hiram. Stephen, in a similar way, really I think taught me the importance of not putting your agenda on other people. After a board meeting at the Covey Leadership Center, my son was deciding where to go to college. And it was clear that I had a view as to where I was hoping he'd go to college. And Stephen said, it sounds to me like you've already decided where you want your son to go to college. Do you think he knows that too? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, yeah, I can promise you he does. And he said, one thing that he had learned was not try to put his agenda on his kids. And he said, you won't be a good advisor to your son until you actually are okay with wherever he goes and are supportive of him, and he knows that. I thought, that is really true. I've chosen for him, and now I'm kind of, not shaming him, but kind of coaching him toward that. Yeah. And I thought, I really do need to change my mindset on this thing. I went home from the board meeting to Dallas and said to my son, you know what, I apologize. You probably know that I've been thinking you should do this. It's not because I want you to go there so much. I just think you'd have a great experience there. But you know what? As long as here, let's sit down and decide criteria that are important to you. Can I also tell you what I think would be important? And we, in terms of the schools you go to, and I said, I am now completely okay with you going to any of those schools, and fully supportive of it. It really was we always had a great relationship, but he could just feel the burden lift, and he just said, great. And I said, I really mean it. As long we've now agreed on the criteria. Any of those 5 meet the criteria, so you just tell me where you're going to go, and it turned out great. But that was a great thing not to try to put your own agenda on other people. And so I tried after that not to be guilty of that.
Bob, you've had a very successful career in life. It hasn't been without challenge, right? I mean, from the outside in, it might look like you've had not a charmed life, but an easier life, but you've had some obstacles in your life as well. I know some of them. And you are very deliberate. You have great perseverance. You have, I think, exceptionally strong character. One thing I like most about you is you model something that we teach around excuse-free apologies. You're pretty deliberate, so you don't find yourselves in a lot of pickles. I mean, you find yourself pretty. I think you stay above the fray because you, I think, have such high character and you're clear in your values. When you do find yourself owing someone an apology, which is rare, and I've seen it, I've noticed in you. You just apologize. You don't attach anything. You don't give any excuses. You show great humility. And that's, I think, a gift to people because it allows people to realize that you too haven't had a flawless record of success, right? You've mentioned some today. Where did you learn that?
I'm not sure, but I think probably because of when people apologized to me, it was always conditional. It seemed like they'd say, well,
you could feel it.
Yeah, you could feel it. It was more like, well, I'm sorry I said that, but I was really tired at the time, or I was sorry I said that, but I'd had a really bad day, and that hopefully wasn't judging, but I just recognized the apology didn't seem as sincere as I am really sorry that I said that. And I thought, you know what, I don't want, and when I need to apologize, which more often than I should need to, you know, if I really am sorry, I should just say I'm sorry, you know, and own the behavior, not try to justify it that, oh yeah, well that was a very bad day for me, so I hope you understand why and then it mutes the effectiveness of just saying I'm sorry. So
I think that's a huge gift you've given the culture of this firm. And I want to end on this thought. I think your legacy, in my mind, inside of our company is going to be the following. It's not that you transformed the landscape of our marketplace, because I think you will have that as a legacy. I think your legacy will be on the fact that this is a very reputable firm. We don't have a lot of accounting restatements, and there's no scandals going on, and it's a very reputable brand, and we practice what we preach. I'm very proud to work here. I give keynotes a lot around the nation. I have a radio program I host for the firm, and I've talked a lot about this gift you've given the company, which is whenever you get 1,000 people together, you're going to have problems, right? No culture is perfect. But at FranklinCovey, we have almost zero tolerance for gossip in this firm. And I have said hundreds of times to clients, it starts at the top. You do not tolerate gossip. It isn't even in your chemical makeup. And at the board level and at the executive team level, if someone isn't there to represent themselves, you will postpone that topic. And you'll say, well, what time does Scott's plane land? In 80 minutes, great, let's come back to that, and let's have Scott represent himself. Because you don't want people to find themselves in the trap of trying to represent me wrong, and then their agendas get involved. And you don't ever tolerate someone else disparaging or criticizing someone. It doesn't mean we have a robust culture, but I think you have set the standard because the board doesn't gossip, the executive team doesn't gossip, the general managers don't gossip, and no one tolerates it because no one believes it's acceptable. And it comes from the top. Talk about how important it is for a leader at any level of an organization to model what they want to see in their people.
Think what a great gift it is to know that when you're not there,
they've got your back.
That everybody's got your back, or that they're going to be loyal to the absent, that you don't have to worry, or you're not jumping on a phone call because you're afraid if you're not on there, something will happen. It is a gift that basically says, look, the person's contribution is important, and we're not going to discuss it without them here. If there's a critique or whatever, hey, great, let's just all sit down and talk about it together. So I just think it's a great human thing, right? To be loyal to the absent and to know that you never have to worry about, what somebody's saying. My wife's that way. I mean, I never have to wonder if she's confessing my sins to her mother or her sisters. I never have thought of that. So maybe I learned it from her. But, really, she doesn't tolerate it either. I mean, she just would never do that. And so we maybe...
Because it's pervasive in some cultures.
Yeah, it probably is. And,
I think it's our strongest currency here. But I'll tell you a compliment. I think it comes from the top. I think you've done such an exceptional job of just making sure everyone knows that's not who we are. Right. That's not going to be our killer app, so to speak. And I think it's been one of your finest legacies here.
Well, thank you, Scott. And it's a great pleasure. It's been great to be your partner all these years.
Thank you, Bob.
I look forward to being partners for many more years to come.
I hope so as well, too.
And I love the FranklinCovey people and our clients. We really are blessed to be doing things that really matter, where we wake up every day wanting to make a difference in a positive way, and that's a great thing to do.
Bob, thanks for joining us. We've interviewed 4-star generals, Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, major celebrities. Try interviewing your boss on the set. It's a little daunting. Thank you for joining us. Hope you subscribe to On Leadership, and we'll see you back here next week for the first episode in our second year for On Leadership. Thanks so much.